Sorry? You're the highest level in this country's office, and you refuse to wear a suit. Just want to see, do you own a suit?
Yeah, problems.
A lot of
The oak-paneled doors of the Oval Office groaned open, revealing a hush among the assembled reporters. A podium stood near the plush couches, cameras flickered with readiness, and staffers from both administrations, American and Ukrainian, hovered near the edges of the room. President Donald Trump sat behind the resolute desk, flanked by Vice President J.D. Vance. The sunlight angled through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny worlds. At the far end, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stepped forward, each deliberate footfall echoing across the thick carpet. Outside, the press had buzzed all morning with anticipation. A rumored peace deal, a conversation about rare minerals, the future of a war that had raged for years in Eastern Europe. Inside, decorum was about to unravel. Trump, in his second term, had spent months insisting he could quickly and easily end the war that had ravaged Ukraine, an outcome promised often on the campaign trail. But reality had proven more complex. Even so, the day's original plan had been straightforward. Discuss an economic framework, sign a deal to share rare earth minerals from Ukraine, and address the press about a vague hope for peace. Yet as Zelensky approached the center of the room, the tension coiled like a spring. No one guessed just how spectacularly things would erupt, or how Zelensky would weather the storm. Zelensky, clad in his trademark olive green suit, carried a folder of documents and photographs under his arm. He had arrived feeling guardedly optimistic. The minerals deal, one that would allow the U.S. access to Ukraine's lucrative rare earth elements, was meant to ensure ongoing American partnership. Ukraine's future hung on that partnership, especially as it faced an unrelenting invasion from Russia. However, mere minutes into the conversation, the atmosphere grew fraught. Although cameras were not yet broadcasting the initial dialogue, a sea of staffers, ambassadors, and officials witnessed the first volley of accusations. Trump regarded Zelensky with narrowed eyes. "You've done enough talking," he said. "You're not winning this war." His voice was deceptively calm. "You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us, but I'm not seeing the gratitude." Zelensky stiffened. "Mr. President, I do appreciate the support from the American people," he began, gesturing to the thick binder of visuals he carried, photos of bombed-out cities in Ukraine. He hoped to underscore the horrific toll the conflict had taken, in the hope that America's leaders would stand firm. "We remain thankful." "Are you, though?" Trump cut him off. "Are you thankful? Because I'm told you've been going around and criticizing our stance behind our backs. I'm told you're not showing respect." Behind Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Vance's voice emerged quietly. "I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office," he said, "litigating your complaints in front of our media, as though it's our fault your country is in trouble. Right now, you guys are going around forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. We're trying to bring an end to this conflict." Zelensky's jaw tightened. This was not the conversation he anticipated. He had expected at least a modicum of statesmanship. He tried to respond, but a wave of overlapping remarks silenced him. Trump repeated, "You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards here." At that point, the White House staff tried to usher out some of the press, but word quickly spread that something more than a routine meeting was unfolding. Reporters in the hallway hurried back in, cameras swirling, capturing the rising voices in the tension. All pretense of diplomacy was slipping away. It was a rare spectacle to see an American president so openly confrontational with a visiting head of state, especially from a nation with which the U.S. had historically sympathized. But also shocking was how Zelensky, though cornered, never seemed cowed. By the time Trump indicated the press could remain, everyone in the room had the same thought. This was about to become a worldwide, televised spectacle. Zelensky inhaled sharply. "Mr. President," he said, addressing Trump, "I am always ready to discuss the path to peace, but that path cannot be one-sided, and it must include real security guarantees. We in Ukraine have lost entire cities. Don't tell us what we're going to feel, Trump snapped, referencing Zelensky's earlier argument that if Russia's aggression went unchecked, eventually even the United States would feel the repercussions. We don't want to get dragged into your quagmire. I'm trying to solve a problem. Vance nodded. You're disrespecting the help we've already given you, he said. We gave you Javelin missiles back in the first administration. We poured billions into your country. Zelensky tried again. And we are grateful for that, but we can't simply— Hold up, Trump interjected, leaning back. The overhead lights cast shadows on the lines of his face. What I'm hearing is you're not prepared to do what it takes to get to a ceasefire. Because let me tell you, you're losing soldiers, you're losing ground, and I can't have the United States dragged in deeper if you won't even try to compromise. The cameras captured the tension in Zelensky's expression. We are on the front lines, Zelensky said. We see daily the consequences of Russia's aggression. Diplomacy requires good faith on all sides. Putin is not— You come here telling the American media that you want more and more from us, Vance said, his voice growing heated. You're basically telling us you want indefinite funding, indefinite hardware, as if we have no say in how this ends. Zelensky held up one of the photographs from his binder, a snapshot of a once thriving Ukrainian town reduced to rubble, dotted with craters from Russian missiles. This is our reality, he said softly, glancing between Trump and Vance. Entire neighborhoods, families ripped apart. Yet the emotional plea was not melting the American leader's stance. Your reality, Trump countered, does not have to include the United States if you refuse to meet us halfway. I can walk out of here and drop all support. Zelensky's eyes flicked to the cameras. He took a step forward, adrenaline pumping. Then you abandon the principles the American people have always stood for, he said. That is your choice, Mr. President. It is not just about Ukraine. It is about preventing a larger war. Trump's posture stiffened. You better watch how you speak, he replied, because we have an entire public out there that elected me to bring an end to these endless conflicts. And you think you can come in here telling me we owe you something? At that moment, a hush spread through the press corps, who had become so accustomed to capturing every second. Zelensky's face took on a resolute calm. I am not telling you what to do, he said. I am only reminding you that freedom and security, these values transcend borders. If the United States wants to walk away, it can. But you will regret it in time. Europe's stability, the world's stability, these are not illusions. The retort was unexpectedly firm. Vance's face reddened. What you fail to realize, he began, but Trump cut him off. You've said enough, JD. Trump turned back to Zelensky. I don't think you know how negotiations work, he said, almost in a lecturing tone. You came here because I have the power to help you. But now you're up here, basically trying to shame us on TV. That's not how you get help. Zelensky's expression hardened. Help is not blackmail. Help, if freely given, is to stop a brutal invasion. Then the corner of his mouth curved. If you would prefer a friend to grovel, that is not help. That is exploitation. The air in the Oval Office quivered. The reporters froze, recognizing that Zelensky had delivered a sharp rebuke to the President of the United States in the seat of American power. A collective exhale rippled among the watchers. Even some White House staffers looked stunned. Behind the tension, behind the cameras, sat the thick binder for the so-called minerals deal. For months, experts on both sides had hammered out the details of an arrangement that would open Ukraine's resources to U.S. companies in exchange for guaranteed security assistance. The arrangement was slated to be worth trillions over time, with rare earth minerals fueling advanced technology and manufacturing. On paper, it had seemed a win-win. Now, with each confrontational exchange, the deal's prospects dimmed. A White House advisor whispered to another that the signing ceremony, scheduled for later that day, was effectively dead. Indeed, that was precisely what happened. As the heated words escalated, the scheduled press conference was abruptly canceled. Staffers scurried in the background to contact media outlets, telling them the event was postponed, though no new time was announced. Trump posted an immediate message on Truth Social, even before Zelensky had officially departed. President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America's involved. He thinks our involvement gives him a big advantage. I want peace, not advantage. He disrespected the United States in its cherished Oval Office. Zelensky, meanwhile, stood stone-faced as aides whispered urgent updates into his ear in rapid Ukrainian. They told him the press conference was off. They told him the White House was no longer prepared to sign. They told him that a motorcade was waiting to escort him out. In the flurry, the ambassador to Ukraine, who had been sitting to one side, pressed her hands over her face, visibly pained. The cancellation of the signing, the collapsed meeting, the shouting, none of it had the faintest resemblance to normal diplomatic procedure. What the world saw on live television, and later in viral video clips, was the final exchange in that tense meeting. Even after staffers tried to usher the press out, the cameras lingered. The lens captured Trump's exasperation, Vance's indignation, and Zelensky's unwavering gaze. Trump leaned forward across the resolute desk. "It'll be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have to change," he said. "You're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. And I don't think it's going to be pretty." Zelensky drew himself up, letting a long silence hang in the air before speaking. "Mr. President," he began quietly, "I came here to show you the devastation, to ask for moral support, to share in the promise of freedom. We do not see the United States as an enemy or an overlord. We see you as a friend. But if you choose to turn away, that is your right." He paused. Then in a calmly measured tone, he added, "If you threaten us with abandonment, if you hold our survival hostage to your demands, then we see the truth of your intentions. Peace at any price is not peace. It is capitulation. And I, on behalf of the Ukrainian people, will not accept that." Trump bristled. "That's the problem right there," he said, raising his voice. "You want everyone's sympathy, but you won't compromise." Vance interjected. "Have you even said thank you once this entire time, Mr. President Zelensky?" Zelensky turned his gaze to Vance. "We have said thank you countless times in actions and in words," he replied, "but we will not beg for what is right." A faint hush fell. Even the journalists seemed to hold their breath. It was in that moment, caught by the cameras, broadcast to the world, that Zelensky delivered the line which would forever define this exchange. Though many translations would color it differently, the essence was the same. "You think my country is weak," Zelensky said, "but I assure you, we remain strong. We do not surrender to threats. History will record who stood for liberty and who sought to barter it away. In the fight for what is right, we will not kneel to any man, no matter his title." With that, Zelensky effectively ended the conversation on his own terms. The hush was absolute. In that moment, the phrase "Zelensky owned them" would later trend on social media feeds worldwide, capturing how a leader from a smaller, war-torn nation stood up to the President and Vice President of the United States in the heart of American power. What followed was abrupt. Aides from the Ukrainian delegation, carefully yet hastily, led Zelensky out of the Oval Office. On his way, Zelensky nodded politely to the cluster of onlooking staffers, some of whom offered sympathetic or stunned expressions, and then walked into the hallway. Outside in the corridor, a final wave of journalists tried to ask him questions, but he simply bowed his head, murmuring, "Thank you, my friends," before disappearing behind the front doors. He emerged onto the White House driveway, where a black SUV waited, American and Ukrainian flags drooping in the summer heat. As cameras continued to flash, Zelensky offered one solemn look over his shoulder. Then he ducked into the vehicle, his security details slamming the door shut behind him. The motorcade pulled away. Inside, White House staff rushed to do damage control. The press was told that further discussions might occur, though few believed it. Social media buzzed with clips of Trump, red-faced, jabbing a finger in Zelensky's direction. The Truth Social post from the president hammered home the official position. "He can come back when he's ready for peace," it read. Yet the images of Zelensky confronting Trump and Vance, refusing to cede the moral high ground, flashed globally. Within an hour, cable news programs offered instant replays and endless commentary, Pundits from London to Sydney expressed amazement at Zelensky's composure amid the onslaught. On Twitter, hashtags like #Zelensky own them soared to the top of the trends. Across the Atlantic, the fallout was immediate. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who had already visited Washington that week, scrambled to gauge how this meltdown might affect ongoing diplomatic efforts. Both leaders had sought to present a united front, hoping to keep U.S. support flowing to Ukraine. Now, with that support threatened, Europe's heads of state braced for a shift in the war's balance of power. In Brussels, NATO ambassadors convened an emergency meeting, worried that America's diminished backing could embolden the Kremlin. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov delivered a statement smirking at the fiasco, praising what he called the new American realism. But behind that calculated facade, Russian leadership knew Zelensky's defiance sent a potent message to Russian troops. For 3 years, Ukraine had been battered, but not broken. Now, the spectacle in the Oval Office might well become a rallying cry in Ukrainian households. In Paris, Macron was quoted as saying, "We must not let the illusions of an easy peace overshadow the reality that Ukraine deserves recognition and security." Prime Minister Starmer similarly called for renewed diplomatic efforts. But it was clear they both grappled with how to proceed without a strong public commitment from Washington. Even as the fiasco echoed across airwaves, Zelensky posted a brief video to social media once he was safely en route to the airport. In the short clip, he stood before the interior of a black SUV, the passing Washington scenery visible through tinted windows. His voice was quiet, measured. "Thank you, America. Thank you for your support, for your faith in democracy, for striving for peace. That is the America we know. A just and lasting peace is all we want, and we remain ready to work for it." He did not mention Trump by name, nor did he address the canceled signing. He spoke directly to the American people, many of whom remain sympathetic to Ukraine's plight. Clips of his short statement quickly circulated, racking up millions of views. Meanwhile, Ukrainian diaspora communities in the United States gathered spontaneously in places like Chicago, New York, and Cleveland, some chanting, "Slava Ukraini," "Glory to Ukraine," as they waved the blue and yellow flag. Hashtags like #StandWithUkraine found new life. Polling data would later show that despite the meltdown in the Oval Office, the broader American public retained considerable support for Ukraine's cause. Back in the White House, a tense hush settled over the West Wing. Trump was overheard telling aides, "He disrespected the Oval, so I had to stand up to him." Vance, for his part, explained to reporters in a hallway scrum, "All I asked for was a recognition that the United States has done a lot, and for Zelensky to show more gratitude. I don't think that's too much to ask." But the widespread public reaction was not as uniformly supportive as they might have hoped. Some commentators lambasted the administration for humiliating an ally, saying that the White House's focus on extracting gratitude felt unseemly. Others argued that Zelensky had overstepped by challenging Trump so directly, and a vocal segment of the population called for de-escalation and an immediate end to U.S. involvement, praising Trump's hard line. The shockwaves were felt among Trump's own advisors as well. Some privately worried that turning Zelensky away so harshly would only further isolate America from its traditional partners in Europe. Others pointed out that Russia, not Ukraine, had initiated the conflict 3 years prior, raising concerns that America's pivot toward blame might undermine the moral stance many believed the U.S. had historically embraced. Within days, images from the Oval Office standoff dominated newspapers worldwide. Headlines blared variations of, "Zelensky stands up to Trump," "Historic showdown in the White House," and "Press conference ends in shouting." Analysts debated whether Zelensky had torpedoed the minerals deal or if Trump had never intended to follow through in the first place. In Ukraine, coverage was rife with both pride and anxiety. Many Ukrainians admired their president's refusal to capitulate, but feared the potential consequences of losing American backing. Soldiers on the front lines near Kharkiv, or in the Donbas region, read the news on their phones between skirmishes, some feeling a surge of patriotic pride that their president had not bowed to pressure. Others worried about a drying pipeline of arms and aid if Washington truly decided to walk away. In Russia, state media crowed about American chaos, proclaiming that Zelensky had been exposed and that the Ukrainian cause was faltering. Nevertheless, some foreign policy experts speculated that this display of Ukrainian resolve in front of the world's cameras might actually energize global support for Kyiv, cautioning that gloating might be premature.